Savage Omega is potentially the most challenging piece of base game content from all of 5th and 6th gen. Today I'm going to show you how to take it down without the use of multiplayer. Ordinarily, beating this boss would require you to party up with 3 other high skilled players, and ideally be in a situation where you can communicate throughout the hunt. And while you can make this happen by joining my Discord, link in the description, many of us, myself included, prefer to rely on our own performance. And with the use of support hunters, we can do just that. The general consensus in the community at the moment is that using support hunters does count as doing this quest solo. Doing the quest without them would then be considered true solo, so don't worry, you're not cheating. Also, this hunt is designed around multiplayer, so do what you will with that. There's multiple advantages of doing the quest solo using these support hunters. One is that the AI is surprisingly good in this game. Your supports will actively do DPS, take aggro and heal when needed. Goes without saying, but they would also avoid attacks. Secondly, even if they do die, which happens but not too often, it doesn't take any of your carts away from you, meaning only your deaths matter in this fight. Finally, by choosing which support hunters we take into the quest, which I'll show you shortly, we can guarantee a team composition that suits our needs and the weapon we're using. Okay, with all that established, let's go over the preparation. For your meal, you'll want to eat at the Grand Hub and choose a food buff with the Insurance skill. This is effectively a free 4th life. For your items, I'd recommend going with something like this. Dust of Life is great additional healing, and buffs like Demon Drugs will last your whole life, giving that extra little bump in DPS. For equipment, to be honest, just use the latest meta for your weapon. Most meta sets at the moment give you plenty of 1-slot decoration skills, which should be used for Divine Blessing. You can then plug in additional defensive based skills such as Recovery where needed. In this fight, the reality is you're likely going to be 2-shot regardless of what skills you take. So while defensives are usually really good, Divine Blessing is the only thing that's realistically going to save you from being deleted. And the only reason I recommend Recovery is because it will help you naturally get out of that 2-shot range after you take the first hit. In my opinion, damage is still king for this fight, and that point is only hammered home with the DPS check that we have to face a bit later on. And finally, please just use the weapon that you're most comfortable with. We can adjust our support hunters accordingly to play around it, and making sure you're doing as much DPS as possible and playing your best is what is most important here. That's why in the background footage you'll see I'm playing Longsword. With all of that, we're now ready to launch the quest. Go down to your quest options and we can turn on support hunters and choose who comes with us. My personal recommendation is to use these. The Lance will take Omega's aggro, allowing you to do DPS. Hunting Horn will provide damage and defensive buffs. And the SNS player will do decent damage while also having more survivability thanks to its shield. If you're already playing Lance or Gun Lance, you can instead opt to use the Hammer Support Hunter for more damage and KO potential. If you're doing this though, please just be prepared to be the player that takes Omega's aggro in the hunt. Honestly, it's not as recommended, and for that reason you may prefer to do the quest in multiplayer, but it's still possible. Entering the hunt, make sure to open your Sacred's pouch and take all of the extra items with you. Trust me, you'll need them. Buff up, take your hot drink and head into the arena. Now, the concept of Savage Omega is that you are essentially fighting the final phase of the regular Omega, but from the start of the quest. Of course, this is what makes the fight so difficult, but it also means you've already dealt with this and succeeded. After all, if you're doing this quest, it means you've beat the first quest. So yeah, you've done it once already. Now it's simply a case of consistently playing around the mechanics you already know. Easier said than done, but I'll give you some tips. The only exception to that is that there is a couple new moves, including the new Frost-based AoE move it uses underneath it, which to avoid requires proper positioning and quick reactions. On that note, you'll want to try and play on the outside of Omega's legs, unless you are playing tank, in which case you'll want to stand at the head of Omega so you can take its aggro and allow the support hunters to do DPS. So playing outside the legs allows you to get out of the AoE under attack range quickly, you can see lasers early, and you'll often avoid the first flame attack by proxy. There is also one of the most annoying moves that Omega can do, which is the dash around, but again, by playing diagonally outside their legs, more often than not, it's not going to hit you. The positioning is easier said than done at the start of the quest. Now, given a little bit of time, your Lance Support Hunter will take Omega's aggro, in which case majority of its attacks are going to be focused forward at that player. When this happens, you can just chill at the back of the legs and do as much damage as you like, but up until that point, you might find yourself running around a lot, constantly repositioning, etc, etc. On this note, you're going to have to just do your best to try and stick to it as closely as possible. The very first phase of this hunt in the first area goes by quickly and it will move shortly, so for the most part, just avoid attacks as and when you see them and do as much DPS as possible. This is the easiest part of the quest. One tip I will say is, don't try and mount Omega during this phase. You can gain much more benefit from doing it in the second phase, so unless you're playing something like Insect Glaive in which you know you're going to get multiple mounts this hunt, just chill from doing that just yet. Now there's some early little tips you can use to abuse Omega in the first phase. One is that when it uses its frontal laser beams, you may not have noticed, but there is actually a focus point that generates on its head. By hitting that, of course, you'll be doing good damage, but also it spawns a protection bubble. This is going to help your Lance player take the extra aggro, but also all of you can stand in that bubble to do DPS to its front legs. In my case in this hunt, you'll notice it was actually the Lance support hunter that popped that wound before I could get there. When Omega moves into the second area, there's now a couple new additions to the fight that we need to play around. One is the use of environmental interactables. In the second area there are ice pillars that hang above on the ceiling. If you land that, it does a good chunk of damage and also provides a damage opening opportunity. Now here's where the issue comes with playing with support hunters. With a normal player that takes aggro, they can naturally lead Omega underneath this so that other players can pull it down. But the support hunter isn't going to do that. There's a level of RNG as to whether or not Omega happens to walk under it. So when you enter the area, make sure to identify where the ice pillars are and try and keep some environmental awareness as to when Omega is stood underneath them. Realistically, you're going to miss dropping these a few times. After all, Omega can quickly reposition and move away as it's falling down. But if you do land it, you've saved yourself some good time. Secondly is the homing incendiary mortar, whatever you want to call it. Periodically, Savage Omega will target you with the flashing circle. When you get this on you, simply put, try and run as far away as possible and try and position such that it lands on the outskirts of the arena. When this lands, a fire AoE will spawn on the ground, which lasts for quite a long time. If it spawns too close to Omega, you're going to have trouble positioning around it. Your options for dodging attacks is now going to be limited, and yet the fight becomes much more tricky. In some instances, depending on RNG, this attack might come out when you're in a position you can't particularly get too far away. This is where Quick Sheath can very much so help, but in a situation with bad RNG you can't get away quick enough and it lands near Omega, try and play around it as best as possible, or hopefully Omega will simply move away from it on its own. The trick to this phase, or well, to Savage Omega in general, is that in order to knock it out of its super aggressive mode, you need to pop wounds on 3 of its legs. And this is why, if possible, try and target the same leg for as long as you can. If your tank support hunter takes aggro, this is much easier to do, but you might find yourself jumping between legs. In general, focus on the 2 back legs where you can. Try and hit the same one if possible. Your other DPS support hunters will do the same. So just make sure you're toggling on and off focus mode in order to spot the wounds as soon as they appear. Now it's very important to pop them as quick as can because Savage Omega can regenerate the wounds. So don't worry about waiting for the right time or anything like that. Just pop them as soon as possible, get the damage from doing so, and also make progress towards knocking it out of the aggressive mode. Now there are periods of time where, to be honest, you are going to have to primarily focus on dodging and avoiding rather than doing DPS. With the time limit set on this quest, it's not ideal, but your other option is dying so. Now eventually, if you don't knock it out at this phase, Omega will do the more sporadic fire attacks. Get on your secret, run as far away as you can is probably the easiest way to avoid it. But once Omega has done 3 of these, every single one of its legs become a focus point to knock it out at that stage. And then yeah, from here for the most part, it's rinse and repeat. Well, that is until it moves down to the next stage and we enter the DPS check. Again, you will already know this from fighting the regular version, but during this phase Omega will spawn a Nursilla that the hunters have to defeat in time. Failing to do so will result in you all being one shot. Now again, because we're doing it with support hunters and only our death matters, if you fail to do this DPS check you're only going to lose 1 card, so it's not as punishing. With that being said, you'll still want to try and do this and I'll give you some tips on how. Number 1 is the cactuar that spawn around. In general, I try and activate as many of these as possible straight away. That way, when Nursilla jumps across to us, it's probably going to get caught in the hits. The damage from these can ramp up quite quick, just know it can also damage you. You'll also notice the other endemic alives that spawn on the map. Now when these are hit or manually activated, they'll run over and you'll see a red cone in which its attack will take effect. You'll want to try and lead them over to Nursilla so that they attack it. This will cause a paralysis, providing you the DPS window you need to get through this hunt. Just be wary, it will also affect you, and not only will it give you paralysis but also poison and the dung effect, preventing you from healing, so please be very careful of this. In my opinion, this is the hardest part of the quest, because not only do you need to do a lot of damage in a short space of time, but also the Nursilla's moveset is incredibly annoying and very good at zoning you away from it. I will say, if you die during this section, just stay in camp until you hear Omega do its final ult. Because if you die, you're not going to get back in time and kill it to survive the ult. You'll just take a second death. With the support hunters, there's a bit of RNG here. I've had instances where they basically stun lock it, generate a force field to prevent us taking any damage during the phase, and also instances in which the support hunters perfectly lead the endemic lives over to give paralysis to it. In other instances, they've been stun locked, we've not done any damage at all, and it's a nightmare. So hopefully by this point you have a cart to spare. You'll probably use it a few times. But yes, assuming you do take Nursilla down, you'll be back to the fight as normal. Once again, landing the environmental interactables, especially the giant ice wall, will do big damage and also stagger the monster. Keep pushing with your DPS, it shouldn't be too much longer until it then moves into the final region. And this is where it can get very tough. Savage Omega becomes a bit more sporadic down here, attacks more often, and if your tank isn't taking aggro, you're going to find yourself dodging more than attacking. You'll see it does the 4 directional lasers multiple times in a row, 3 consecutive fire AoEs, rockets that never seem to end, and much more. This is why, if you are in a position in which you've completely broke one of its legs, Savage Omega will drop a interactable. This is like picking up ammunition, but instead of giving you some sort of damage projectile, it will give you a spawnable shield. It's up to you. You can either save this for the right moment where you know you're going to die to the big beam, or you can spawn it early in order to gain more DPS and again allow your Lance player to take aggression. These shields in my opinion are the #1 way to get through the final phase. Once again, when Savage Omega uses its big beam move, this will also create a wound that when popped spawns the shield, very similar to the lasers we discussed earlier on. Targeting and proccing that when possible will help tremendously. But yeah, focus on staying alive, heal as much as possible, and also providing you still have Dust of Life, try and heal your support hunters when you notice multiple of them are low HP. Because again, while it doesn't necessarily matter if they die in terms of our cart count, it will still take them a good amount of time to get back down to the arena, during which point you're likely going to take much more of the aggro. But yeah, for the most part, getting through this final section just relies you to be consistent with what you've already learned getting to this point. The mechanics are the same, there just might be more of them, or they happen in a shorter span of time. You can once again drop the ice down that spawns on the ceiling above to hit Omega for big damage and stagger it. However, I will say in this phase especially, Omega moves a lot, and so you won't consistently drop these. Keep pushing and eventually you'll get the kill. Honestly, my biggest piece of advice for this fight is keep going. You are going to fail the quest multiple times in a row. Let's be honest, just because you've watched this sub-adequate player beat it, it doesn't mean you're going to run in there and do it first try. Even in this hunt I died multiple times to things that feel almost unavoidable. This guy can pretty much two-shot you with anything. Sometimes it feels like complete BS, and so you have to take some of these deaths on the chin. Just make sure that when you do die, go back to camp, restock your items before heading back down. If you run out of your food buff, make sure to eat and rebuff yourself where needed. Make sure to leave a comment down below if you have any other advice I have missed out in this video. In my pinned comment I will edit any additional tips I forgot to mention, so please make sure to go check that. Also drop a comment if you do manage to beat it. I'd love to see you guys come back to the video and tell me how it went. Thanks for watching.